Welcome. Thank you for being here. In a world filled with noise, constant distractions, and pressures that never seem to stop, pausing to reflect has become almost an act of courage and also a necessity. This space is for that, to slow down, to think clearly, to listen calmly, to return to what truly matters. Today we're going to explore a truth that can transform the way you see your life, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Take a deep breath and let's begin. Money and the heart. Money has a very particular way of affecting the heart. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't knock forcefully at the door. It slips in quietly. It begins small, a bill that arrives sooner than expected, an unexpected expense, a comparison with someone who seems further ahead, and slowly, almost without noticing, that concern begins to occupy space in your mind. Maybe you've been praying for provision. Maybe you've been asking for stability. Maybe you even wonder why. If you're trying to do the right thing, things still feel difficult. But there is a question we rarely ask. What if God is not delaying your blessing? What if God is changing your season? The Bible constantly speaks about seasons, not only natural seasons, but spiritual cycles, seasons of planting, seasons of waiting, seasons of invisible growth. And financially, this becomes even more evident. There are seasons where everything flows, doors open, resources seem to multiply. And there are seasons where everything feels limited, tight, restricted. But restriction does not always mean punishment. Sometimes it means preparation. Before abundance can be handled, character is required. Before expansion, there must be order. Before outward growth, there must be inner transformation. Many times we ask for more money, when God first wants to shape a different mindset, because the problem is not always how much you have. The problem is how you think about what you have. The season you are living today may not be a sign of permanent lack. It may be strategic, a formative stage. God does not waste processes. If you feel financial pressure today, it may not be an ending. It may be a transition, and transitions rarely feel comfortable, but they are necessary. When God changes a financial season, He does not always begin by increasing income. Sometimes He begins by adjusting priorities, refining habits, revealing hidden dependencies you didn't even know were there. And when that internal work is complete, external provision arrives with greater stability. The question is not only, when will my situation change? The real question is, what is God forming in me during this season? Because when you understand that, you stop resisting the process, and you begin to grow inside of it. The invisible weight of money. Money rarely shouts. It almost never interrupts with a loud sound, but it speaks. It speaks quietly, every single day. It speaks when you check your account before going to sleep. It speaks when an unexpected notification appears. It speaks when you compare your situation to someone else's, and little by little, it begins to occupy space in your mind. It's not just a number, it's what that number represents. Security, stability, control, or fear. Many people are not truly worried about money. They are worried about what might happen without it. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose my job? What if I'm not moving forward fast enough? What if others are ahead of me? That constant what if is what wears down the soul. Financial anxiety does not always come from lack. Sometimes it comes from comparison, sometimes from pride, sometimes from expectations that were never truly yours. We live in a culture that measures success with numbers, income, properties, visible achievements, and when the world defines value based on possessions, it becomes easy to believe that our personal value depends on them too. That is when money stops being a tool and starts becoming identity. And when money becomes identity, any loss feels personal. That is why even when income increases, peace does not always arrive. Because the issue was never only how much you have. It was the place it occupies in your heart. The Bible does not ignore this tension. It does not romanticize poverty. It does not idolize wealth. It goes deeper. It invites us to examine where we place our trust. Because when trust rests in something unstable, the mind never rests. And money by nature is unstable. It can grow, it can shrink, it can disappear. But true peace cannot depend on something so temporary. And here the real reflection begins. Not about how much you earn, but about what money means to you. Because before transforming your finances, you must transform your thinking. Where is your true security? If money cannot guarantee peace, then the question becomes unavoidable. Where is your true security? The Bible is clear. It does not say security comes from abundance. It does not say peace comes from having enough saved. It does not say freedom depends solely on financial success. It points to something deeper. Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf. Proverbs 11:28. This verse does not condemn money, it questions trust. Because the problem has never been possession, it has been dependence. When security depends on a bank balance, peace depends on the market. When confidence depends on income, calm depends on next month. And that turns life into an emotional roller coaster. A good month brings relief. A bad month brings anxiety. An opportunity brings hope. A loss brings fear. But God does not fluctuate. The security that comes from Him does not shift with circumstances. That does not mean irresponsibility. It does not mean neglecting work. It does not mean ignoring planning. It means understanding the right order. First trust, then management. First identity, then results. When your identity does not depend on what you have, money loses its emotional power. It no longer defines your worth. It no longer controls your decisions. It no longer dictates your mood. You begin to see it for what it is, a temporary resource. And when security is properly placed, the mind begins to rest. And then a new question arises: if right security transforms peace, how is the mind transformed? Because before numbers change, the way you think about them must change. The mind decides before the money. Before money moves in your hands, it is already moved in your mind. Every financial decision begins as a thought: buy or wait, save or spend, invest or avoid risk, give or hold back. Those thoughts are not random. They are shaped by deep beliefs we rarely question. If you grew up hearing that money is never enough, you may make decisions from scarcity. If you learned that money defines success, you may spend to prove something. If you internalize that no one will help you, you may accumulate out of fear. The mind creates the pattern. The pattern creates the habit, and the habit shapes your financial reality. That is why two people with the same income can live completely different experiences. One lives in constant anxiety, the other in planning and calm. The difference is not always the amount, it is the mindset. The Bible expresses it powerfully. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. What you think about money influences how you use it, and how you use it influences what you build. If your mind is governed by fear, decisions will be impulsive. If governed by comparison, they will seek approval. If governed by pride, they will seek image. But when the mind begins to renew, something changes. You begin to pause. You begin to question the real motive behind each expense. You begin to distinguish between desire and need. And that pause is powerful, because that is where true transition begins. Not when income increases, but when thinking matures. God does not only transform circumstances, He transforms the mind. And when the mind is ordered, money stops being reaction and becomes conscious stewardship. And now we reach the next step. Because understanding the problem is not enough. We need the process. When fear becomes financial identity, there is a silent danger that almost no one notices. Money stops being something you manage and starts becoming something that defines you. It doesn't happen suddenly. There's no alarm announcing it. It begins small. You work hard. You try to be responsible. You compare yourself a little. You worry from time to time. And without realizing it, your financial situation stops being a circumstance and begins to turn into identity. You are no longer someone who has debt. You begin to feel like you are a failure. You are no longer someone who earns little. You begin to believe you are behind in life. That is when fear stops being external and becomes personal. And when fear becomes personal, decisions change. You no longer spend with wisdom, you spend to prove something. You no longer save with calm, you save from anxiety. You no longer plan with clarity, you react emotionally. The mind begins to connect money with personal worth. And when that happens, every financial movement feels like judgment. An unexpected expense feels like defeat. A smaller income feels like insufficiency. A comparison feels like inferiority. But there is a deep truth you must remember. Your value has never been in your numbers. The Bible is consistent about this. Our identity does not come from what we possess, but from who we are before God. When your identity is anchored in something stable, money loses its power to define you. But when your identity depends on financial success, peace becomes fragile. Because numbers change, seasons change, income changes, but your value does not. And this is where true financial healing begins. Not when you earn more, not when debt disappears, but when you separate your identity from your economic situation. When you understand that money is a tool, not a mirror. And when that separation happens, something inside you becomes lighter. Money stops feeling like a constant test and begins to feel like a responsibility. And responsibility is much lighter than fear. When money enters the relationship, there is something many people avoid admitting. Money does not only affect the individual mind, it affects relationships. Couples who love each other deeply, yet argue about expenses, families with good intentions, but constant tension over financial decisions, friendships that grow distant when economic differences appear. Money does not destroy relationships by itself, but it exposes insecurities. It exposes priorities. It exposes fears. And often the issue is not how much comes in or how much goes out. It is how it is discussed. Financial silence creates distance. Avoidance creates suspicion. Lack of clarity creates anxiety. And when anxiety enters a relationship, it begins to erode trust. The Bible gives us a powerful principle. Two are better than one, for if one falls, the other lifts him up. That principle applies to finances as well. When money becomes a hidden subject, it turns into an invisible enemy. But when it becomes an open conversation, it loses power. Talking about numbers calmly, reviewing decisions without accusations, admitting mistakes without shame, that requires maturity. But it also brings peace. When two people choose to face reality together, fear is divided. And when fear is divided, it becomes smaller. It's not about controlling every cent with rigidity. It's about walking with clarity. Money handled in secrecy creates pressure. Money handled in unity creates stability. And when stability enters a relationship, peace begins to rebuild. Because the real financial problem is rarely only economic, it is emotional. And when emotions are ordered, numbers begin to find their place. Fear as the hidden root. There is something we often fail to recognize when talking about money. Fear. Not obvious fear. Not the kind that is shouted, but silent fear. The one hiding behind decisions that appear rational. Fear of not having enough. Fear of losing what you've achieved. Fear of depending on others. Fear that the future won't turn out as planned. And when fear takes control, money stops being a tool. It becomes a shield. You start making defensive decisions. You save more than necessary, yet still feel insecure. You work longer hours, yet never feel it is enough. You compare yourself constantly, searching for proof that you're doing okay. The problem is not working. The problem is not saving. The problem begins when fear becomes the driver. The Bible does not ignore fear, it confronts it. Again and again it reminds us that fear should not be the foundation of our decisions, because when fear rules, peace disappears. And without peace, even abundance feels like scarcity. Many people believe they need more money to feel calm, but what they truly need is a renewed mind. Fear is not eliminated by numbers, it is eliminated by perspective. When we understand that money is not our ultimate source of security, something begins to shift. Decisions become slower. Conversations become more honest. Goals become more realistic. You begin to ask yourself, am I making this decision from anxiety or from wisdom? Am I acting from pressure or from purpose? That pause changes direction, because when fear loses strength, clarity gains space. And when there is clarity, money returns to its proper place, not as an enemy, not as a savior, but as a resource. And true financial change does not begin in the bank account. It begins in the mind. When comparison distorts reality, we live in a time where comparison is constant. You don't need to leave your house to compare yourself. You don't need to ask how much someone earns. Social media, casual conversations, the stories others display, expose you constantly to other people's progress. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin measuring your financial life by rules that are not yours. You see trips, you see houses, you see new cars, you see successful businesses, and something activates inside. It's not always envy, often it's insecurity. You start asking yourself if you're doing enough, if you're moving too slowly, if you should take more risks, if you should have more. And money stops being aligned with your purpose. It starts becoming a tool for competition. Here again, the mind becomes decisive. Because comparison does not only affect emotions, it affects decisions. We spend to appear stable. We invest from pressure, not conviction. We take on debt to maintain an image. But the Bible never defines success through comparison. It speaks of faithfulness. It speaks of responsibility. It speaks of consistency. And that changes everything. When we stop comparing, something is released. We can look at our finances honestly, accept our starting point, set realistic goals without the burden of impressing anyone. Comparison creates hurry. Hurry creates mistakes. Clarity creates direction. When we stop competing, we begin building. We build habits. We build discipline. We build peace. Every financial story is different. There are seasons of growth, seasons of adjustment, seasons of learning. But when you understand that your value is not tied to your economic position, something deep stabilizes inside you. You no longer need to prove anything. You simply need to manage well what you have today. And that, though it seems simple, is profoundly transformative. Because true security does not come from being ahead of others. It comes from being at peace with the process you are living. From impulsive spending to conscious intention. There is a place where our mind reveals itself more clearly than we imagine, not in what we say, not in what we plan, but in the way we spend. Many financial decisions are not born from real need. They are born from emotion, stress, boredom, frustration, celebration. Without realizing it, consumption becomes an automatic response. We buy to feel relief. We buy to reward ourselves. We buy to distract ourselves. We buy to escape. And for a few minutes, it works. There's a brief sense of satisfaction, a small feeling of control, an illusion of well-being. But then comes the silence, and often the guilt. That is when we understand something essential. The problem is not the spending itself. The problem is the motive behind the spending. When money becomes emotional anesthesia, it stops being a healthy tool. The Bible speaks about self-control not as harsh restriction, but as a deep form of freedom. Because when we do not control our impulses, we end up being controlled by them. And that applies to finances as well. Self-control does not mean living in fear. It does not mean denying every pleasure. It means pausing before reacting. It means stopping for a moment and asking ourselves, is this responding to a need or to an emotion? Am I seeking relief or making a wise decision? Does this purchase build my future or simply calm an uncomfortable moment? That pause is powerful because in the pause there is awareness, and in awareness there is freedom. Over time, decisions stop being impulsive and become strategic. We plan instead of reacting. We prioritize instead of improvising. We choose instead of drifting. And the change first happens in the mind. Less anxiety, less regret, Less internal chaos, more intention. Because true financial control is not about how much you own, it is about how you choose to use what you have. And when intention replaces impulse, a new stage begins. Building with purpose, not just surviving. When we stop reacting impulsively, a new space appears, a space that used to be filled with urgency. And in that space, something different is born. Intention. Many people live financially in survival mode, not because money is always missing, but because they never stop to define where they are going. They live solving problems, paying bills, putting out fires, but not building. Building requires vision. It means asking, why do I want financial stability? What kind of life do I want to sustain? What values do I want reflected in my financial decisions? Without purpose, money scatters. It goes toward the immediate, the urgent, the loudest demand. But when there is purpose, money begins to align. Saving stops feeling like sacrifice. It becomes strategy. Reducing expenses stops feeling like limitation. It becomes focus. Investing stops being external pressure. It becomes conscious planning. The Bible speaks about building on rock. That is purpose, foundation, clarity. You do not need a large income to build intentionally. You need direction. Two people can earn the same amount. One lives in constant tension. The other moves forward with order. The difference is not the amount. It is the vision. When there is direction, money stops feeling unpredictable. It becomes a tool for construction. And progress becomes quiet, but real. Not the loud progress others display, but the internal progress that gives you stability. And when there is purpose, pressure decreases. Because you are no longer competing, you are building. When the plan falls apart, even when you do everything right, life can surprise you. You can plan, save, be disciplined, and still, something can disrupt the order. An emergency, a job change, an unexpected expense, and in that moment, your income is not being tested, your inner stability is. Because when the plan shifts, fear tries to return. See, it's never enough. You weren't prepared. You lost control. But when you have worked on your mindset, your reaction changes. Concern may not disappear, but it no longer rules. You breathe, you review, you adjust, you learn, because you understand something fundamental. Your stability does not depend on a circumstance. It depends on the structure you built. The Bible does not promise the absence of storms. It promises firmness in the middle of them. Financially, that means not spending everything in times of abundance, not panicking in times of scarcity, not making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Financial maturity is revealed under pressure. It is not perfection, it is resilience. And resilience is the ability to bend without breaking. Peace as an inner indicator. There is a deep question almost no one asks. Am I at peace with the way I handle money? Not whether I earn enough, not whether others are moving faster, but something simpler. Is there calm when I think about my finances? Peace is a silent indicator. When money occupies a disordered place in the heart, the mind never rests. There is always an internal calculation, a comparison, a quiet uneasiness. But when inner order is established, something changes. Responsibilities do not disappear. The constant inner struggle does. The Bible speaks of a peace that guards the mind, a steady peace. Financially, that looks like reviewing numbers without anxiety, adjusting a budget without feeling like a failure, saying no without guilt, moving forward without desperation. Peace does not come from absolute control. It comes from proper order. And when peace becomes central, decisions become coherent. And true financial success stops being accumulation. It becomes balance. Financial freedom is not what you think. Many believe financial freedom is a number, but it is not. Because if fear is still present, more money only amplifies fear. If comparison is still active, more money increases competition. True freedom is detachment. It is being able to use money without money using you. It is being able to lose without collapsing, to gain without becoming obsessed, to move forward without losing peace. When the heart is ordered, even during growth the mind remains steady. That is freedom. Money as a tool, not an identity. Money is not an enemy, but it is not a savior either. It is a tool. And like every tool, its impact depends on how it is used. When money becomes identity, any loss feels like a crisis. But when it returns to its proper place, something aligns. It no longer defines who you are. It no longer dictates your value. It begins to serve. Serve your purpose. Serve your stability. Serve your vision. And when that happens, the mind rests. True order begins in the mind after this entire journey. The conclusion is not financial. It is mental. Money was never the main problem. The root was always the way of thinking. When the mind is renewed, decisions change. When decisions change, life becomes ordered. It is not about having more, it is about living better. With more calm, more clarity, more intention. If this message helped you see money from a different perspective, subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about faith, mindset, and practical decisions for real life. Because true change does not begin in the bank account, it begins in the mind.